Since all of us sitting at home right now due to the lockdown and the coronavirus, we thought we would start doing these webinars on a kind of a regular basis, both to occupy ourselves and hopefully to provide something of value to the people watching. So the people in this webinar are Mo, you probably see him, white hair, beard, Rashmi, there with the glasses, Deesh, oh, you may not be able to see them right now, but you will. Deesh, whitish hair, no beard, and me, the person talking. So initially, Rashmi, Mo, and I will be talking for the first, say, 20 to 30 minutes. And then Deesh will join in to facilitate the question and answer section of the webinar. So let me tell you a bit about ThinQ for the people who don't know. We are a group of people committed to education for well-being. Within that, our work is within intellectual well-being, where we work on developing in students the ability to construct and evaluate knowledge across disciplines. We help students think like mathematicians, scientists, philosophers, historians, and so on. The plan for today's webinar is to take you through a couple of simple examples of what we do with students. For today, as it says on the screen, we are concentrating on definitions. So this part of the webinar will go on for 20 to 30 minutes. Once we are done, we will move on to questions. However, ask questions whenever they occur to you from now onwards. We will only be able to address them once that first section ends. So you ask it on Facebook as some people have already posted comments, so I'm pretty sure you guys know what to do. So to begin, we thought we would start by a couple of concepts all of you have probably encountered in primary school, solid and liquid. Rashmi, do you remember the definitions you learned for these terms? I'm guessing fifth grade, fourth grade, something like that?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Yeah, I remember something like a solid has a specific kind of shape, and the liquid takes the shape of the container in which you pour it.
Okay. So solids have a specific shape and liquids take the shape of the container. Okay. So that's interesting. So I agree that my table is a solid. This wall back here is a solid. It's not going to change its shape. But so now a grain of rice is solid, right? Kind of makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Because it doesn't change shape. But now if I take a handful of rice and put it into a glass, or let's say, so I have some namkeen, it's in here, it takes this shape. And now if I put it in this bowl, it kind of takes the shape of the bowl, right? It flattens out. We're back here. Oops, sorry, I just spilled some. It takes the shape of the container again, right?
Right.
So, so clearly, by your definition of solid, this is not a solid, right?
Right. This is a liquid, according to my definition.
So what's a liquid?
Something that takes the shape of its container when you pour it into a container.
Something which takes the shape of the container. Well, clearly this took the shape of the container, so it's a liquid. Okay.
Yeah.
So similarly, a piece of thread, if you go by your definition, is what?
A piece of thread, yeah. I mean, if I coil it around something, then maybe it's a solid because it would stay like that. Like if I make a bundle, but if I just sort of throw it on the ground, then it's a liquid or if I throw it into a jar, like your namkeen jar, then it's a liquid.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, yeah, if you follow that definition, if so, salt, a handful of salt is also a solid. Okay. What about
No,
a,
no. That should
hmm?
be
A
liquid,
liquid.
right? Because you can
Oh,
put
sorry.
it in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
container.
I
Yeah.
meant to say
Salt,
liquid.
sugar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I say solid, I mean liquid. And well,
That's very
when I say
helpful.
liquid,
Yeah.
sometimes
I
I
think
mean liquid,
that's,
sometimes.
yeah. I think that's going to be really challenging, the webinar
Yeah.
then.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so salt is solid liquid by that definition. And what about a soap bubble?
A
Spherical.
soap bubble is solid.
Right? It has
By
its
that
own shape. But if you look at what people want to call these things, well, definitely not solid, right? And they're definitely not. They don't want to call a soap bubble solid. They don't want to call the namkeen or the rice liquid. That doesn't seem to work with our intuitions of what these concepts mean, right? But if you
Right.
ask most people, is this namkeen solid? They'll say it's solid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mo, how do we deal with something like that?
See, the difficulty is that solid is a word in ordinary English. And in ordinary English, you don't need a definition. So for example, if you point to a bamboo and say that's a bamboo, you don't need to define bamboo. You don't need to define dog and cat, because these are ordinary English words. When you define them, you are implicitly saying it is an academic word.
Okay.
And I'm not muted.
Yeah, Mo, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Tara says she can't hear me.
No, you're perfectly fine. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So the definition given in textbook doesn't match the concept that people have of solid in their ordinary life. That's the problem here. So in fact, we have the concept of solid even without a definition. I'm pretty sure that, I don't know if there is a word for solid in Hindi or any of the Indian languages. In my mother tongue, there is no word. And yet, children, by the time they are 3 or 4, have the concept. And they don't need the definition. And what the textbook does is to give a definition that doesn't match their experience of solidity. So the question to ask is, what is our experience of solidity? So you said something like the wall, this is solid. I can do that without looking, right? By simply pressing against it, I know it is solid. Whereas the definition says it is visual, it is not visual. So if I take a bucket of water and immerse my hand in it, I know it is liquid. I can do that blindfolded.
Yeah.
That's our experience of solid. So we need to have a definition different from what is there in the textbook, such that it reflects our experience. And if you're going to academia, it should reflect the academic use of solid.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting challenge.
Yeah. So when we have a definition and the examples don't actually match the definition, so we don't think that those examples should fit into this definition. Our intuitions go against it. At that point, we have two choices, right? We either match our intuitions, we change our intuitions, we change to match the definition. So we can say that the namkeen is liquid, once again. So we could either say the namkeen is liquid and the soap bubble is solid. Or we can say that or we have to change the definition. These are our two choices. As rational people, we have only these two choices.
Yeah, that comes from the prohibition of logical contradiction.
Yeah.
The consequence of the definition should not contradict our judgment.
Yeah. Okay. So actually we have a question here about, just wanted to flag this because someone asked what the purpose of the webinar is. I thought I'd bring that up right now before we move on, just because otherwise people might be lost. We did talk about this earlier. The goal right now is for us just to take you through the sorts of things that we are, that ThinQ as an organization does. We help students construct and evaluate knowledge. And we're just taking you through a few examples.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're picking up this solid example because it's very important to challenge and to question and challenge the definitions and statements made in textbooks. This is a very simple example. The textbook definition is simply wrong.
Yeah. It doesn't match what we would experientially judge to be our notion of solid and liquid. Okay.
Yeah, and
so,
not just textbooks, but anything someone says, if it falls under the purview of an academic subject or concept, it must be evaluated in this manner, right? That you need to figure out whether everything that a person is saying or a book is saying is consistent with each other internally, or are there any contradictions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So it might be useful now to move on to kind of illuminate what we were doing right now, but with a slightly simpler example, more Rashmi.
Yeah. So so I mean, solid and liquid, although like what Mo said was that they are, we have a familiarity with them even outside of academics, but they do have certain, like a academic baggage, if I can call it, associated with it, because we've spoken about textbooks and, school. So I just wanted to pick something, which is familiar to us outside of textbooks and school, food, right? So I was thinking of, we did this with a few teachers and a few students. So I thought it would be interesting to pick this topic up for discussion right now. So I will first ask Madhav, you, if I were to define idli, like let's say that idli, the food idli, has suddenly become an academic concept and it must be defined. What do you think you would do? How would you go about it?
Well, to me, when I hear the word idli, what comes up? Something about the shape, what it's made of. These seem to be the things which occur to me. What's it made? Rice?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
it's something made of rice and is in I don't know what you would call the idli shape.
The idli shape. That's a bit circular.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
This is like saying the shape of the earth is a geoid, and geoid means geo means earth, and earth shaped. Earth is earth shaped. Idli is idli shaped.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or a solid is solid.
Like a textbook.
Exactly. But I don't have a term for that shape. What's that shape called?
Actually, is shape relevant? I want to ask you, if you're blindfolded and people chopped up idli on a plate and they chopped up, let us say, something else, uttapam on a plate, and they ask you to taste it, will you be able to tell this is idli and that is not idli?
I would think so. Yeah.
So even if you cannot see the shape, you'll be able to tell idli, right? Experientially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
in contrast to samosa, if you eat samosa, you know it is samosa, not idli. Blindfolded.
Right.
Oh, so you're saying, sorry. So you said that idli, you won't be able to tell blindfolded.
No, you said you can, right?
Yeah.
And I also think I can, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the point is, if I can tell the difference without looking at it, without knowing the shape, then the crucial factor seems to be the taste.
Right. So it looks like there are certain, criteria you are both of you are using to, say that whether something in front of you, something you're tasting or something you're feeling is idli or not idli, right? And Madhav used shape and also, its contents as the criteria, although Madhav doesn't know the contents other than rice.
Right.
And
his mother must have told him it as rice and lentils.
Yeah. So and also there is the taste of the idli. So if we could somehow, I mean, we need not do it here, but if we could have like what is the shape of an idli or what is the taste of an idli, if we could somehow articulate that in very clear, unambiguous language, then it should be able to clearly tell us whether anything in front of us is an idli or not idli, right?
Yeah. So that is only important if we consider idli to be an academic concept if we're looking to investigate, right? If it's just experiential concept.
Let's try to treat idli as an academic concept and see if we can come up with a definition. Okay. I want to ask you this question. Suppose you put idli batter in a square mold and then you put it on the table. Instead of being blindfolded, you are looking at it and somebody asks you, is that an idli? What will be your answer?
No.
You will say it's not idli.
Yeah.
And now you take a piece of it and eat it.
Yeah.
And they ask you again, is that idli? What will be your answer?
Probably yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But
so
unless it could change the shape though, right? It's like the taste, the shape could change the taste. That's the only concern I might have. But,
but yeah, assuming it doesn't, it seems like, it's very important to you that all your criteria are fulfilled when you say that. So it's not like it should just fulfill one of the criteria which you've suggested, but all of them. So for example, something that, one of our team, Sriram, told us about is this new thing called brownie idli, where they basically take a brownie batter and steam it in idli molds. And then you have the shape of an idli, but nothing else of an idli, right? So that alone is not sufficient for you to call something an idli.
Fair.
That raises an interesting question. Suppose I put bright red color in idli batter and then make idli in the right shape. Everything else is the same and it's on a plate and you look at it. Will you say that is idli? If the color is bright orange or bright red?
Well, yeah, if I'm just looking at it, but it has the shape, you're saying?
No, the color.
Yeah, no, but it still has the idli shape.
It has the same idli shape, yeah.
Okay.
And the taste.
And assuming that the taste, you're just looking at it right now, right? Yeah. So I would say it is an idli, would be my judgment. Yeah.
Oh, even though it has the red color and the shape is that of idli, you will say that it's red idli.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would too.
I might be hesitant to call it idli. I'll say that's a strange thing. I have never seen it before.
Okay.
But our intuitions are in conflict now.
Yeah. So I guess if we take shape as an important thing, as an important criteria, well, clearly that's it can be overridden by other stuff, right?
Right.
Well, for you, it can be overridden by color. For me, it can be overridden by taste, and so on. So I wouldn't consider that the chocolate thing to be
correct.
Idli, because I consider taste to be an important criteria there. So we can have.
Let me ask you a question. Instead of color, suppose I put lots of sugar in idli batter.
Yeah.
Everything else is the same. The shape is the same. The color is the same. And you look at it and say, that is idli. And then now you taste it.
Then it's no longer.
Oh, that's not idli?
No. I don't know.
No.
Not for me, but Rashmi?
Okay. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't call that an idli.
Yeah. So idli cannot be sweet.
Yeah. So it seems like there are certain rules, like certain things are just not okay. So if that kind of criteria holds, then you can be sure that it's not an idli. And then there are certain other criteria which also seem to have some sort of order of preference. So you would pick this over this. And for different people, these could have, given that it's not an academic concept, there is a matter of preference or personal intuition playing a big role here. So for each person, even though they are internally consistent, there could be variations in among people, across people.
Yeah.
So different, like for Mo, something else could override the criteria of shape. Well, and for Madhav, it can't. So yeah, so basically like what is emerging to me is that the definition is kind of a set of rules that you apply to an object, and if they fulfill those things, then the object is matches what you're trying to define, and if not, it doesn't, right? And then there are these examples we are considering which seem to be like confusing examples, like the case of the brownie idli, or there are others like rava idli or ragi idli, right? Which there is something off in one of the criteria. So those are the things that will, you know, sort of help you evaluate which criteria overrides the other for you.
Yeah, yeah. So,
But
so
if you're
then,
using it as an academic concept,
Yeah,
then you can't have these variations across people. You have to have a collectively agreed upon definition if idli is an academic concept.
yeah, or you have multiple concepts of Italy, and then you explore each of them.
Yeah.
But you need at one particular. The important thing about when you decide it's an academic concept is that you have to agree on a definition, at least for the time being, while you're working through it. Then you can change the definition and work through that. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, you get the sorts of things that happen on TV debates and so on, where people are just screaming at each other because they're using words to mean different things. So there's no actual debate. It's a yelling thing going on. Okay.
So before we move on to anything else, Mo, could you talk a little bit about what you mean by word and concept? Because we're talking a lot about concepts, so it would be useful to just briefly
my favorite example when people ask me about the distinction between word and concept is this. So if I take, for example, suppose I had said, I have exactly 4 fingers on my right hand. I'm showing you my right hand, and I'm telling you I have exactly 4 fingers. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Some of you might say that is false because I have 5 fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But my response will be, oh, this is not a finger, this is the thumb. So whether my statement is true or not depends upon what meaning I assign to the word finger. And in the dictionary, both meanings exist. So the word finger has 2 concepts attached to it. One of them is, these are fingers, this is not a finger. The other is, all of these are fingers. And if you now say, if I use the word Malayalam word viral, all of these are virals. But if you ask me how many fingers, how many virals do I have, I will include my toes as well. I have 20. In English, the word finger doesn't refer to toes. They're distinct. In Malayalam, viral includes that. So different words have different concepts. Sometimes the same concept can be referred to by different words in different languages. There is a many-to-many relation between them. So that's what we mean by the importance of distinguishing between words on the one hand and their meanings or the concepts on the other.
Right. So another, like the other way to look at it is that a concept can be expressed by many words. Like you said, that it's a many-to-many relation. So the concept underlying, represented by the word round, is the same as the concept represented by the Hindi word goal. So there is something which is, I mean, I'm not sure if that is exactly the term, but the point is that there is something that, you know, the word is basically like you're just assigning that concept a certain term for you to refer to it. It's just that, right? But when we are going into these things of idli, we are going well beyond the word and understanding what we think it means or what it means to us.
Yes. Yeah. So that is, we are engaged in conceptual inquiry, investigating the concepts. And that's very important in learning.
Yep. Okay.
In fact, you said goal.
Yeah.
Is goal the same as round? For example, if you say a ring, is that a goal? The ring that you wear on your finger, circular ring, is that a goal?
I would associate goal more with like a ball.
Ball, okay.
Yeah, sphere. Yeah.
Round can be, you know, a round line, right?
Right.
So there is a difference.
Right. Or maybe sweet and meetha is probably a simpler example, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But then notice that, so you have the many to many relationship there. So sweet and meetha refer to the same thing, but meetha can refer to two different things, right? It can refer to a person.
Yeah.
Like it can be an adjective for a person, and it can be sweet.
Yeah. And it can refer to items of food also.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's time to kind of put things together, and then we can move on to questions. So what we did, we started with solid and liquid, two concepts which you guys, almost everyone's probably familiar with from elementary school. And in fact, you probably understood it way before that. The textbook definition of solid is an object which has its own shape and its own volume. While the textbook definition of liquid, which you learn in the 5th grade, 4th grade, whatever, is that it's an object which takes the shape of whatever container it's in, but has its own volume. So we agreed that by those definitions, though a grain of rice is solid, a handful of rice, if you put it into a container, it takes the shape of that container, right? So a handful of rice is liquid. Similarly, a soap bubble is solid because it has a clear spherical shape. So clearly, but I'm not sure whether these match our intuitions. They definitely don't match my intuitions of solid and liquid. So clearly we have to change the definition of solid and liquid, or we change our intuitions. In this case, I'm not really willing to let go of all my intuitions. So I would work on changing the definitions. Okay, so that's what we started with. Then we moved on to idli, which we tried to treat as an academic concept like solid and liquid are in textbooks. And we tried to come up with criteria on which we could decide whether something is an idli or not. Of course, there was a lot of variation amongst just the three of us, and I'm guessing that's a small subset of the variation which would exist if there were more people here. But if we want to investigate idlis, if we decide for some reason to do that, then we have to decide on a definition which we all share so that we can actually go about investigating it, keeping the same object in mind, right? Mo mentioned the fingers versus fingers and thumbs. That's the issue you would get into. You would get into silly disagreements, which are just based on definitional differences. If you didn't have a common understanding of a concept before investigating it. Okay. So Mo, is there anything else you want to add before?
No, I think that's, if you take examples from mathematics, what we said will become startling actually, but we'll reserve that for a later webinar.
Yeah, okay, that sounds
How to
good.
define notions like circle and triangle and so on. Then it becomes much more startling than the kinds of examples that we discussed.
Yep, that sounds good. Rashmi, anything else? Can you hear Rashmi?
No, that's all. That's good.
Okay, great. So now,
can't you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah, you're fine. So now I'm going to hand over to Desh, who's going to take us through some of the questions that you guys have asked. And now please add in more questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. We've been getting a number of questions from the listeners. I'm not sure we'll be able to cover all the questions in the half an hour that we have, but we'll try to do our best. I will verbalize the question and then request one of you to address the question. The first question is, what is the link? We started off the session with the title on the slide which said definitions. What is the link between definitions and critically evaluating knowledge and creating knowledge? Mo, can I request you to answer the question briefly?
Yes, by knowledge, what we mean by and large is a set of propositions that we regard to be true, a set of statements that we regard to be true, but quite often we express these statements in terms of words and sentences. So we cannot really critically evaluate the proposition until we know what the proposition is. And for that, we have to know exactly what the meaning of the words are in that sentence, which expresses the proposition. So we cannot express the truth of the proposition that I have exactly 4 fingers on my right hand, unless we know what we mean by the word finger. And that is what academia does. We define the concept of finger such that we are able to critically evaluate the truth of propositions. So definitions are crucial in academia, but not so in outside of academia. And outside of academia, quite often, as Madhav pointed out, we engage in fruitless disagreements simply because our meanings are different.
Okay, moving on to the next. We have some questions on the solid example and other questions on the idli example. I'll first verbalize those on the solid example. This question comes from Dimple, who asks, the textbook definition says that solid is something that doesn't change shape, and a liquid is something that takes the shape of the container, which does not match our intuition. How about particles in the medium, as definition closely packed? Are they solid?
Well, yeah, so you can start talking about particles. We picked this as something from a 4th, 5th grade textbook, where students, if you introduce them to the knowledge of fundamental particles like molecules and atoms and so on, they don't have the ability to, they don't have an understanding of these things at that point. So we were picking something from that grade level. In fact, I would argue that most people who have gone through it in the 9th and 10th grade, definitions of solid to do with particles, have not understood how they can justify that they exist, these particles. How do you know that molecules exist? How do you know that atoms exist? On what basis are you saying that the solid you see in front of us is made up of tightly packed molecules and atoms? Till you are able to justify that atoms and molecules even exist, that's kind of hollow, that definition.
And I would also like to add that solidity is not a concept at the level of molecules or atoms. So if I ask you the question, is a water molecule solid, liquid, or gas? That makes no sense, because a water molecule can be liquid if it is water, can be gas if it is above 100 degrees centigrade, or solid if it is ice, but the water molecule is the same. So solidity doesn't apply to molecules, it applies only to aggregates of molecules.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the suggestion was. It was tightly packed molecules is basically what her suggestion was. Makes it a solid.
The question would be, what does tightly packed mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? What do we mean? What's a molecule? Why should I believe that they exist? These are all questions which need to be addressed before we can go on to molecules and atoms. Yeah. And this is definitely not done in schools, because the justification for atomic theory that there exist atoms, I never learned it in school.
Okay, moving on to the next set of questions. We have a number of questions on the idli example that you used. So let me try to combine a few if I can, but the first one goes to Arati Bharat, who says in the definition of an idli, you kept adding conditions of shape, size, color, etc. If you keep trying to add conditions to make the concept clearer, won't it just become more confusing? As a continuation, academically, don't people mainly want a concise definition for precision? Mo, would you like to take a crack?
Some concepts in academia can be defined in one sentence with one criterion. So for example, if you ask me what is the definition of an insect, you could say an insect is an organism with 6 legs. Or I could say an insect is an organism with compound eyes. But if you take a complex concept like species, what is a species? The situation is notorious. You cannot give an answer in one sentence. This will be a definition with many sentences, many propositions. And that is true for a large number of academic concepts. Now, in the case of idli, if you want to make it an academic concept, then you have to set up criteria, and you say you have to organize the criteria in some kind of hierarchical way, and say something like the most important criterion is shape. If that is taste. If that is satisfied, you go on to shape, and if that is satisfied, you go on to color and so on. So you have to have some kind of levels or priorities of criteria. It is doable. It will not be confusing. And this is actually what legal definitions do. We can follow a similar strategy.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, Deesh. So it's you know, in addition to that, it's usually constructing a definition is not something that you could do in one sentence. So even if you end up with a one sentence definition, the process that you would actually take to arrive at that would be quite complex, like the one we just went through. Because for you to evaluate the outcomes of your definition in, you know, comparison with your intuition, you need to understand what are the characteristics you are intuitively using to call something an idli or to call something an solid. So in order for you to even begin venturing into that, it would take this amount of work and rigor. And then you may find that, you know, shape is not important or taste is not important, right? And then you would end up with something shorter and more concise, like you said, but that's not necessary.
Yeah, as a follow-on question, and maybe you could take it on, Rashmi. This is from Soumya, who asks, is it really useful to have very strict boundaries for idli? Can't idli mean many things which are similar? So she brings in the utilitarian view. She wants to know what is the utility of doing this?
Right. So I think I'll take it up briefly, but I think Mo should pitch in. So it's, you know, for me, the utility of a definition lies in what it is going to be used for. Why do you need a definition for idli? So if you need a definition for idli in order for you to come up with, you know, some kind of a specific theory or a specific explanation for something, then the criteria you use to define it would depend on that. And you know, I'm not so sure about the boundary conditions, so maybe Mo could take that up.
Mo, would you like to add?
Let me go back to the distinction between academic concepts and ordinary language concepts. So if in ordinary life, you don't have to define idli, you don't have to define grass, you don't have to define bamboo, because we kind of intuitively have some kind of concept. We don't have to define red in ordinary English or ordinary life. But in academia, we are evaluating knowledge claims. That is when definitions are necessary. Otherwise, people will have different judgments of truth depending upon the meanings that they attribute. So it is extremely important that in academic language, we define the technical terms that we use. Otherwise, we will have unnecessary controversies, or what look like controversy, but is really not. So if you want to state, for example, such and such statement is true about triangles, if you do not define triangles, there will be no mathematics whatsoever. It'll be just confusion. So in summary, if you want to move from ordinary use of language to academic use of language, we have to define the terms that we are using when we express claims of knowledge.
So with the idli thing, it would even be a little bit outside of academia. For instance, say the government talks about, release a report about idli prices, and they include prices of idlis which are made out of brownie batter. That's going to skew things hugely, right? Because prices of that will be much higher than the price of a regular idli. So it's important that even in those places that there's a clear definition before you take reports like that seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to move on. From the specific questions on the idli and the solid as a shape, there are more, I'm moving on to a more generic strand of questions that we are getting. The first one, I'm combining what both Ayan Dutt and Payaniappan have. This is about how we define in general. the question goes, maybe we should reconsider how we define things at all. Because if we define words with other words, can we say they have any relevance in the real world at all? Or can definitions be associated with the thought process that takes place in one's mind when thinking of a word? Such a definition can be used to distinguish between when a parrot says idli or when a human says idli. And the follow-on question from Paniappan is it possible to define rules for a definition? So Mo, can I request you to take a crack?
That's actually, these are important questions. I'm not sure I will be able to answer it satisfactorily in 1 or 2 minutes, but let me try. So when somebody asks for a definition, we express it in some other words. So for example, if somebody asks you, what is a triangle? You typically say something like, a triangle is a polygon with 3 sides. Notice that now I'm using the word polygon. And somebody will ask you, what is a polygon? And then we use other words. And each definition implies other concepts. So definitions are built up of other concepts which are themselves defined. At some point, so this is a kind of infinite regress. At some point, we are going to say, okay, I can't define it. I'll assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. So at some point, for example, if you ask for definitions of triangles and polygons and sides and so on, we are going to end up with something like lines and points. And in Euclid, lines and points are not defined. These are called primitive concepts, undefined concepts. But the idea here is, for the sake of academic rigor, we must keep undefined concepts to a bare minimum. And the structure of concepts is built out of definitions. And that's a very important part of academic knowledge.
Yeah, and in mathematics, you would also, you leave them as undefined concepts with certain rules which govern them. When you're dealing with the real world, then you can just, at the bottom, you point at stuff, right? That's what I mean by this entity. Yeah.
Yeah, in a certain sense, you've answered.
Was about, sorry, Paniappan's question was about rules of, was it Paniappan?
Yes.
Somebody else asked that question.
Is it possible to define the rules for a definition?
Yeah, one basic rule of defining is that a definition should tell you what belongs to the concept and what is outside the concept. So if I define solid, I should be able to say, that is a solid, this is not a solid. If I want to define democracy, I should be able to say, given that definition, it follows that this is democracy, that is not democracy. So essentially the very first statement is, you should be able to tell the difference between what is and what is not. An example of that concept. And there are other conditions which I won't go into right now.
Okay, just moving on. There was a question from Arjuna, which I think you already answered, but I think there is value in just stating the question. Even the definitions are composed of words which need more definition and hence more words and so on. But he wants to know, how do we solve this problem? And from what you answered, that as we go deeper and deeper, we just have to assume some concept in order to build on that concept to arrive at other definitions.
Yep.
Moving on to another strand of questions. Is there a need to go into definitions in such detail at the level of school or objects of daily life? Why are these not a matter of convention? This is coming from Anand Ahuja. Can I request Madhav to take a crack?
Sure. So definitions about objects in daily life is not required. What is required is if students is for students to have experience with constructing and evaluating definitions at the school level, so that when they finish school or even during school, they have the ability to evaluate stuff that they read in newspapers, that they get from on news channels, get from governments and so on, that they're able to make good decisions on whatever aspects of their life they need to make decisions on. Because a lot of stuff relies on the definition of the words being used, whether it's a doctor's report or whether it's a decision on what to do in terms of like financial planning and all of these things, a lot of this stuff relies on definitions. So the important part is being able to construct and evaluate definitions, which we want to give students an experience of during their school life.
Yeah. Moving on to the next.
I just want to add to that. I just want to say that it's not about the definition at all in some cases, like especially when you're doing it in school. Not only are you acquiring the ability to construct and evaluate words and sentences, like Madhav said, but also certain attitudes of being skeptical of what is presented to you, and understanding how you can explore it on your own and understand it for yourself. How do you judge something to be true or not true, and what kind of reasoning processes would you use in such a process?
Yeah.
Perfect. Moving on to the next is a question from Anuraja, which is more like a suggestion. Generalizations based on common traits exhibited by a group of objects that need to be defined is what her comment is. Do we have anything to comment on that, or a response from any of us? Rashmi, would you like to take a crack?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is like understanding what is common to a group of objects is the sort of an attribute or a characteristic that makes them all similar. So if you're trying to say classify something or group a bunch of objects into categories, then that is a process you would use for that. And in order for you to do that, you should be able to clearly articulate what is that attribute or property, and then define it such that others understand what you're saying, and appeal to shared concepts between you and the readers to be able to say that clearly.
All right, moving to the next. There's a question on intuition and the role of intuition in the context of definitions. This is from Jyoti, who asks, intuition is important, but sometimes it's not always enough. Is that correct? For example, my intuition would tell me that a sponge is neither solid nor liquid, because it is not as hard as I would expect a solid to be, nor as fluid as I expect liquids to be. So with intuition as a base, doesn't it make sense to build a definition upon it instead of around it? Mo, would you like to respond?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, where it leads us to something that we didn't mention in our discussion, namely the use of the term solid in physics is based on correlation with states of matter with temperature. So a clear case is water, for example. Water turns into gas at 100 degrees centigrade and becomes solid at 0 degree centigrade. Now, these are abrupt changes, sudden changes. Between 1 degree centigrade and 99 degrees centigrade, the temperature increases, nothing much happens. So this is not gradient. There is an abrupt transition at these points. This is the notion of solidity in physics, the abrupt differences. But now consider, you take water and you mix a little bit of atta in it. It is still liquid. You mix more atta, As the atta increases, notice that it becomes less of liquid and more of solid. And when it is the batter with which you make chapatis, then it's somewhere between solid and liquid. So that notion of solid is different because it's a gradient notion. You'd have to say something like more solid or less solid, or more liquidy than less liquidy, and so on. So these are two different concepts. And sponge is less of a solid in that experiential sense, not in the sense of transition. So we need to separate these two notions of solidity as a function of temperature, and solidity as a function of yielding to the pressure of hands and so on.
So one thing which, one other part of the question which we haven't addressed is the role of intuition, which, sorry, I forget who brought it up. So intuition here is important to an extent, right? As we said, what you can do is reject your intuitions and accept a definition. That's always an option. And so, so the role of intuition here, intuition plays an especially important role in concepts at the very basic level, when you're trying to define simple concepts like solid and liquid and so on, where after that point, you rely on various other things. Once you get to more complicated things, then you're relying on things like criteria like that the predictions made by this concept are there are many predictions which this concept makes. There's many interesting things. By that I mean there's many interesting things you can say about this concept. That's why we picked this concept. And there are various other criteria you can use in order to decide whether something should be the definition or should not be the definition. Intuition will play smaller and smaller roles at that stage.
Yeah, actually, I should also add to that. In academic work, we try to keep both side by side, the definition and the intuition. And if there is a conflict between the two, we try to adjust both. And we might discover at some point that our intuition is right and your definition is wrong, or we might discover that the definition is right, our earlier intuition is wrong. So we should be open to correcting either of them. So the value of this kind of exercise lies in keeping both and making a decision on what ought to be corrected. It's quite often not easy to tell what we should correct.
Perfect. One other follow-on question on intuition, which reads, it's from Soumya, which reads as follows. Are there cases when the reality is quite different from intuition? How would you define such cases where intuition cannot be the base of your reasoning?
Well, Einstein's general theory of relativity and special theory of relativity are examples where intuition diverges significantly from from the conclusions arrived at, right? For instance, you don't see a limit to how fast you can go. That doesn't seem like an intuitive concept. That there exists this upper limit to how to the speed of objects. Newton doesn't have that. Newton kind of matches our intuition pretty closely. Einstein doesn't. So that's one example. Anything else?
Would you like to add?
Actually, there is a more startling example. What does our intuition tell us about the Earth moving? Is Earth stationary or does it move? The raw intuition says, obviously the Earth doesn't move. And science tells us that that intuition is wrong. So a large number of things that science tells us, what mathematics tells us, are actually attacks on our intuition.
Okay, with those two examples, we'll move on to the next. This would be the last question because we are running out of time now. Give the last 5 minutes to three of you to wrap up the session. The last question is from Vinati, who asks, if I'm not wrong, you mentioned academic concepts and experiential concepts in the discussion. Can you elaborate? Does that mean experiential concepts cannot be academic? Should I request Rashmi to start off and then maybe Mo to add on?
Yeah, so like I was answering in my answer to a different question, where the definition really depends on what you're using it for. So if you need to, I mean, academic concepts are usually concepts that other academics can use to, you know, to develop theories or explanations for their observations. So inherently there is something shared about them, which experiential concepts need not have. I mean, by experiential, I mean like daily life, like the idli example. So you need not really, you know, be too rigorous about what you judge to be an idli or what you don't. But if idli becomes part of some research, then you would have to, because there would be a lot of people, you know, trying to understand what you're saying and also using what you are developing for their own work. So in that sense, you would have to be more rigorous.
Mo, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, let me take an example, because many of the academic concepts are built on experiential concepts, are modifications of experiential concepts. Of course, there are also academic concepts which are not related to experience, ordinary life, and also experiential concepts which are not academic. So let me focus on experiential concepts which have been modified. Take the word inertia. Inert means not moving. So if some object is not moving, you say that exhibits inertia. If it is moving, it doesn't exhibit inertia. This was Aristotle's notion of inertia and force. Force is that which changes inertia, which means that which changes non-movement to movement. Galileo changed that notion of inertia to inertia is that which changes velocity. So whether something is moving in uniform velocity or is it complete rest, force is that which changes that. Notice there is a startling change of the concept of inertia when it became an academic concept. And this happens quite often in a large number of cases. For example, the ordinary English meaning of the word animal, I would say worms are not animals and birds are not animals. But in biology, worms, frogs, and humans are animals. This is where the ordinary concept of animal is different from biological concept of animal.
Thank you. With that, I'm wrapping up the question and answer session and handing it over to Madhav for a wrap up of the session with maybe Mo and Rashmi can also add on to the wrap up.
Yep,
Madhav.
That sounds good. Okay, so thank you everyone for being a part of this session. Hopefully there was something you got out of this which was at least interesting. We will be doing this again, hopefully next Sunday, but we'll let you know through Facebook and email, depending on, we'll be in touch. Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. Mo, is there anything you want to add about what we did today, just to sum up?
I would like to say that what we were doing was really illustrating the kinds of things that we do as part of this, what we call the ThinQ enterprise. And it may be useful to look at our website and try and find out what we do. If you found it interesting, if you found it valuable, then do take a look at our course, the online course that we offer, which is about, when are we going to begin, in May?
So it's going to begin the middle of May.
Okay.
The exact dates are on the website.
Okay.
And the registration shuts on the 1st of May, I believe. So please register for the course if this has been of any interest to you, and join us next time, next week.
This is actually an invitation for the adventure of thinking and learning how to think clearly, precisely, using the academic modes of thinking. You will learn how to think like a mathematician, how to think like a scientist, how to think like a philosopher, like a historian, and so on. That's what we have to offer.
Rashmi, anything?
No,
Okay, great. Deesh, you good? Okay. Okay, thanks a lot, and we will see you next week, hopefully.